Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
Mickey, the visual gags are not getting better. Although I gotta say, that has a certain charm. Have you grown a gray beard, Mickey, and mustache?
I'm just old and tired, Bob. I was reading this comment from one of our readers. One of our subscribers, Michael Drew.
Subscribers? Wait, this is a Parrot Room patron?
Correct, but it was just on my Twitter feed.
Oh,
I assume he watches the regular one too. And he said, "Do you guys think you're up to this anymore? I'd be interested in your self-evaluation after you listen to the last Parrot Room. Bob in particular just sounds so overwhelmed by weariness and the prospect of fielding each topic as it comes up. And I'm a subscriber." So
I should be wearing the beard, not you. I'm the one being accused.
Well, it's both of us, and I think we should just go with it. That's our brand. We're the weary boomers.
I agree. Plus, that's a good look. I wish the many people listening on podcasts could see that. You must have paid a fortune for that thing. It's so lifelike.
It was $6.99 on Amazon, and it came 10 minutes before I was ready to sit down, so I had to.
Thank you, Jeff. Delayed. Thank you, Jeff Bezos. By the way, you hear? Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Did you hear about his misfortune? Jeff
I'm
Bezos?
Too tired to respond now. What? Go ahead.
Did you hear about Jeff Bezos' misfortune?
No. Is he not going to space?
He is, but okay. So he comes out and he says, "I'm going." I think it's like July 20th or something.
Yeah.
And so and the headline is, guy who runs company, goes up in space, blah, blah, blah. Well, Richard Branson, not to be outdone, announced then that he would be going up, actually 2 days from now on Sunday. And so he's going to beat Jeff Bezos to it.
Well,
and,
he hopes.
That's gotta hurt.
He hopes. I think Jeff Bezos can probably weather the blow, since his empire is growing and Branson is expanding.
Plus, his is a real rocket.
Branson is cratering. What?
His is a real rocket. That's the full astronaut experience. With Branson, you got to go up with a plane that's being, held up by a plane, and then, that's fake.
None of them are going into orbit, right?
No. I mean, but still, there's somebody paying $28 million to be with Jeff Bezos and his brother. I mean, I hope it goes well for the
My beard
Bezos
is falling
family.
off, so I'm going to take it off.
I think it would be easier to understand you possibly if you didn't have that on.
Now I have hairs in my mouth. So people are paying $28 million for a few moments of precious weightlessness with Jeff Bezos?
And his brother. And an 82-year-old woman who was an astronaut during the Mercury era, back when female astronauts didn't get to actually go into space. And so
she's never been in space?
No, this is her first time. And so that's a great story. I gotta say, in narrative terms, Bezos is just killing Branson. Branson's got him and these three people we've never heard of who are,
And you think, and Bezos is not, this woman isn't paying her own way. She was selected by Amazon PR because she was a good story, right?
I think it would really damage some of the PR benefit if Amazon demanded that she even subscribe to Prime in order to go. Anything at all would be like a bad idea. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a freebie. Yeah.
They should advertise the space flight on Prime. That would be a good coup. But anyway, but Bob, what does JD Vance think of all this?
I was going to bring up JD Vance, your man, JD Vance. He's had a rough week.
He hasn't. JD Vance is the new Trump. Every story about anything political has to have a JD Vance angle. So I think Greg Sargent has written 3 of the last 5 post columns about JD Vance. I mean, he's really, but also, Morning Joe's run 2 shows in a row about JD Vance. Everybody's talking about JD Vance.
This is the Trump formula. Get them to hate you loud and strong, and you win. I will say though,
what's he done so terrible?
Oh, I'll list a few things, but first I want to say that among his detractors is Matt Lewis of the highly regarded DMZ podcast. And, Matt has serious hillbilly credentials himself. This is not like me criticizing JD Vance. Matt grew up in West Virginia, working class family. Father was a prison guard, went to college in West Virginia. He knows a thing or two.
I think he lives in West Virginia.
I believe
he's a big immigration softy. He's for amnesty. That's the secret motivating force, is that Vance is tough on immigration. So all the people who are anti-immigration are saying, oh, he's a hypocrite because he changed his mind about Trump. Well, but the real motivating force is they want amnesty. It certainly is the case with Mona Charen. Said Vance, he posts alarmist tweets about immigration. Imagine that. Can't have that. And you know, Tim ODC, who I don't follow, I said no. We got in a Twitter argument, and I said, I think Mona just disagrees with him on policy, and he said, you're right. I'm with Mona, but the point is, it's a policy disagreement.
Yeah, but people like her are pointing to things that I personally find disturbing. I mean, I guess my position is, I wouldn't consider it catastrophic to have a Trumpist president in the sense of following the kind of core policies of Trumpism. I mean, you know, more restrictionist immigration policy, tighter enforcement at the border. I mean, as long as they don't follow Trump's policy of making everyone already here live in fear. I mean, that for a few years wouldn't be fatal. More protectionist trade policy wouldn't be fatal. But, you know, I would want that person to not have Trump's most disturbing characteristics, or at least not, and not pretend to have them, whether he has them or not.
Well, and he doesn't have them, so what's the problem?
Well, I mean, he's signing on.
I notice you've already promoted him to president, which is fine, because that's what this is all about. It's not about
it is
him being senator. It's about if he's senator, then he's immediately a presidential contender.
Right. Yeah, that's why you're interested with him. You don't live in Ohio. So first of all, you know, let me read you from an NBC News interview. This is a paraphrasal. But he avoided a direct answer when asked if he believes Biden's win was genuine. Okay, so he apparently won't acknowledge that Biden is the legitimately elected president. That's kind of alarming. Okay, let me continue. Saying only that he thinks there were voting irregularities and media censorship by big tech that raised questions about the election's fairness. And here's the quote. I do think there were really serious problems, Vance said. I think there's a little bit of weird double standard, blah, 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 where for the past couple of presidential elections, the Republicans won. There have been Democratic criticisms. So he just won't say, yeah, we have to accept Biden as legitimately.
There's sort of two sort of mealy-mouthed, middle-of-the-road responses to that. He has the same one as DeSantis, which is to say there was a lot of unfairness, and there was a lot of unfairness. Why was the Hunter Biden laptop story brutally suppressed? Like a story's never been before. It's unbelievable. So that alone is enough to say the election was unfair. Remember, it's as if George Bush's DWI had been suppressed before the 2000 election.
Let me ask you a question.
Okay? It had the potential to move a couple of crucial percent.
Let me ask you a question. Is Joe Biden the legitimately elected president of the United States, in your opinion? He is?
Yes.
What do you think it means that JD Vance won't say that?
I think it means that he's trying not to say that, and he's trying
you don't think it's alarming,
as reasonable as possible. Kevin McCarthy doesn't really say it either. I don't think. I think Kevin McCarthy says, well, we counted the votes, and Trump made all his objections, and Biden is the president. Okay.
So wait, you think listing Republicans who are refusing to acknowledge Biden's legitimacy is going to convince me that that's okay? The Republican Party is a total disaster of dishonesty and cowardice. I mean, we knew that. What I'm saying is the only kind of Trumpist president I wouldn't get really creeped out about is one who wasn't a dishonest coward, which JD Vance clearly is.
Nothing he said, he didn't say Biden was illegitimate. He just didn't say he was legitimate. And nothing he said in that
How do you think that reads? How do you think that reads to his audience?
I'm sure it reads to some people like they should storm the Capitol, but there are not many of those people.
It isn't just that, Mickey.
He is saying the same thing as DeSantis says, which is, that there was unfairness and he's, there was a very long Twitter thread this morning addressing this issue and saying, look, here's what people are upset about. They saw with the Russia thing that there was basically get Trump at any cost among the national security bureaucracy, and they promoted all sorts of lies, and according to this guy, things they knew they were lies, and these people knew the election was stacked against Trump, and that's what it means. It's unfair, and they're pissed off, and they're pissed off the same way Stacey Abrams was pissed off when she wouldn't say that Kemp was a legitimate governor of Georgia. So, yes, I'd rather he didn't say that. It's not a deal breaker. It's not a deal breaker.
First of all, if you look at what she said closely, she didn't quite, I don't think, say that.
I think she did.
But I'm just saying, anyone who will not...
He still hasn't conceded, I don't think.
Anyone who will not acknowledge that the legitimacy, the fundamental legitimacy of the process, unless it is plainly illegitimate, and he says, quote, I think Josh Hawley did the right thing. Do you think Josh Hawley did the right thing in not certifying the election?
Certainly not what I would say. And no, I don't think he did the right thing, but I think, okay. I think, look, I'm not going to agree with JD Vance on everything. The question is this a deal breaker? If
let me give you something else.
And convinces you by his utterly reasonable behavior that he is not Donald Trump, I think he has a chance to win over people like you, even you.
Okay, but there's a difference between us. This stuff just doesn't bother you as much as it bothers me. I remember right after the election when Trump was saying, I don't accept the election results. And I'm like, Mickey, this is alarming. You say, it's nothing. It'll blow over. I mean, you kept that up for a long time, and you just don't, I still think you don't understand the extent to which the rule of law depends on norms. It depends on everyone, like serious politicians agreeing. You kind of got to say, okay, the guy in the White House is legit. You got to be able to say that. JD Vance can't bring himself to say that.
No, you got to be able
that is a danger to the republic.
You have to recognize him as president. In fact, if he gives an order, you have to say that's an order. Why does he have to? Look, the people thought it was Hitler.
That's what legitimacy means.
People thought Trump was Hitler. So if you thought he was Hitler, you might do anything to defeat him. And people who voted for Trump are rightly suspicious. Okay, and the whole media was stacked against him. Just the media being stacked against him could make you think it was unfair. I agree that the Hawley thing goes further because that is challenging the actual vote counting mechanism, and all of Vance's other statements actually skirted around that. He didn't challenge the vote counting mechanisms, and that's vastly more troubling. I agree.
No, but the word legitimacy is just an absolutely key word. It's an absolutely key word. That's what keeps the system alive.
Legitimate?
Yes.
You don't utter the word legitimate. It's mandatory speech.
Well, if somebody asks you,
or our democracy dies. That's insane.
Well, what's essential is that a president be considered legitimate, and that's why if somebody asks this guy who wants to be president, is the current president legitimate, and he won't sign on to that, he's just a coward. He has no integrity.
You think in the Hayes-Tilden election that all of the losers supporters said that the winner was legitimate? No, it was a huge controversy that lasted for years and years.
No, right. And
did all Gore's people say that Bush was legitimate? I don't think so. Did all Hillary's people say that Trump was legitimate? I don't think so.
Gore himself did say that. And my only point is, look, obviously there have been people in American political history who didn't do this. I'm just saying I would never vote for them for president.
Okay.
You would.
Well, look,
I wouldn't.
Let me give you some. He's not being as courageous as he could be. On the other hand, if he was as courageous as he could be, he would be a deadweight loser in the Republican primary.
But at some point,
he's saying he's going as far as he can in the reasonable direction. He's saying Trump appreciates people who stand up to him, so that gives himself some room to disagree with Trump. He's
wait. What?
I would prefer it if he adopted the Kevin McCarthy tactic, which is to say, look, we counted the votes, we held the challenges, and Biden was the winner. End of story. But I think probably the Republican electorate somehow doesn't buy that for the reasons that this Twitter thread goes into, which is you just think the whole process was stacked against him.
Right. But at some point, you just got to, I mean, if you have integrity, at some point, you just have to decide to either opt out of the system or start another party or do something. I mean, that's my view.
At some point, you have to show some integrity.
Question is how abject.
As a guy who got 5% in a primary because he did absolutely nothing that politics required, I'm sympathetic to Vance, and I don't think this is the point at which he has to demonstrate.
I think you may be rounding upward to the nearest 5%, but I digress. Here is how
Bob,
you got. Yeah,
every loser of every election knows exactly what they got.
What was your exact number?
The winners don't have to remember.
What was your exact number?
Remember, it was,
what was it?
5.1%, I think.
One more thing, just in terms of how abject JD Vance is, this is a tweet that was quoted in the Bulwark piece, which I think was by Mona Sharon. Is that where she wrote her thing? A tweet from JD Vance, February 12th. Someone should have asked Jeffrey Epstein, John Weaver, or Leon Black about the crazy conspiracy is on all caps, that many powerful people were predators targeting children. In other words, he's saying QAnon people aren't crazy. Without using that term, that's obviously what he's doing. That's the only way that's meant to read. He's signing on. He's saying, hey, QAnon folks, I don't think you're crazy. That is fucking disgusting. That is disgusting. And I think he finally deleted it, but so what? I mean, the guy has no integrity.
It's weird. I almost wrote exactly the same thing. I mean, it does show that without QAnon, it does show that these conspiracies do happen. So I would.
And what's the point?
It's an interesting point. Conspiracies happen. It's an interesting point that the people are right to be paranoid.
Oh, but come on. Do you think this is meant?
It's not necessary. It may be a message to QAnon supporters saying you're right to be paranoid. That's not completely insane. If it's saying QAnon is right to specify a particular pedophile conspiracy, that's sort of crazy. And I think that's why he deleted it and rightly got shit for it. But
so wait, you think? Seriously, Mickey, you think QAnon people read this and make that fine distinction you're making? And say, well, he's not endorsing this conspiracy theory, so maybe I should rethink that one.
No,
obviously,
Mickey,
the way 98% of them will read this is, you're probably right about this QAnon thing, and he knows that, and he knows that.
But he did not endorse QAnon. He went right up to the line, and yes, and that it was a bad tweet. That's the worst that Mona Sharon could come up with. He deleted it. I don't think you disqualify somebody for a bad tweet. It's not just a bad tweet.
He knows, he knows what he's doing. He faces a challenge. Should I tell the truth about QAnon? Like, hey, this is just too crazy. I mean, after that woman lost her life in the Capitol, but because she had fallen prey to this bullshit. And he's still giving them aid and comfort and saying, yeah, sign on to this. Come on, Mickey.
Every now and then when I always wanted the Daily Caller to do an article. I think they finally did it on conspiracy theories that were true. There's this conventional establishment idea that every conspiracy theory is bullshit. And a lot of times they turn out to be true. And it's worth making that point. I agree the QAnon adjacency, and I think Mona's characteristic, somebody characterized it as Q adjacent, and that's correct. That was bad. He should withdraw it. It was an irresponsible tweet. But
no, but I mean, we're judging the guy.
You want him to be completely honest, in which case he gets, he continues his career as an investment banker and has no chance.
I didn't say I want him to be completely honest. He's welcome to do the standard politician's lies, but there are a few issues that are just fundamental here. And when you are encouraging, and that's what he's doing here, Mickey, he's encouraging QAnon people to feel stronger in their crazy convictions. That is the practical effect of this tweet. Now, if you and me and him were having a seminar about epistemology and somebody wanted to point out that conspiracies happen, well, first of all, obviously, you don't need to point that out.
QAnon people, you're not crazy. Even if Q is crazy, you weren't crazy to believe it. That's not. If you phrased it that way, that wouldn't be a crazy thing to say. You're rational human beings. You fell for this conspiracy, but you're right to be paranoid about pedophile conspiracies. If you're a pedophile and you want to have a lot of sex, you're going to have a conspiracy because it's illegal. So that would be a reasonable thing to say. What he said was unreasonable. It's not going to I don't think it's going to devastate democracy, and he took it down. He should get shit for it.
Yeah, but he shouldn't have to await the blowback to take it down. This is fundamental.
You're right.
The question here. Let me drive this. Let me
a fundamental destruction of democracy. That's insane.
So you're now mocking that after I said that about Trump, and January 6th happened, and you're back to mocking the whole idea?
No, I'm mocking this hair trigger existential threat to democracy every time somebody says something that implies the election was bullshit.
Well, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about QAnon.
I know, but before we were talking about the election.
But let me just, we should move on, but let me just try to frame this slightly differently. I mean, as I said, there are forms of, ideological Trumpism. I mean, there are people who could be ideological Trumpists who wouldn't terrify me if they were in the White House. But, it's like the Trumpist constituency is, maybe in principle all constituencies are dangerous, but here, this is one that has been rallied largely on the basis of, fear and, to some extent, appealing to various resentments and so on in ways that Trump did that I thought were unconscionable. And so I would ask, well, who is the next Trump going to be? Is he a guy who will understand that there's some places you just don't go with these people? There's some emotions you're not willing to exploit. And this one tweet tells me, no, JD Vance is not that guy who understands that there are some things that are just playing with fire, some emotions you don't exploit. He's not that guy. He doesn't have the integrity.
Very few politicians are. Bill Clinton certainly wasn't. He flew back to Arkansas to execute a retarded man. Okay, he knew the virtue of a cheap appeal, too. Nobody is perfect. He isn't perfect either. He's a politician. If he was perfect, he would have zero's chance. He's in a Republican primary, and he's making this concession to anti-Trump sentiment. He's going as non-far as he possibly can, and still have a chance. That's the calculation.
He couldn't have not tweeted this. He couldn't have not tweeted this and had a chance to win.
Nobody knows how much chance he has, but he's being as responsible as he can while preserving a shot in the Republican primary. Okay. Cut the guy some slack. And plus, you said he had a horrible week. And so he lost Morning Joe and Bob Wright and a bunch of liberals who aren't voting in the Republican primary in Ohio. Why was that a bad week?
No, I take your point.
Everybody's talking about him in every newspaper and every opinion column. It's such a dead news time that he's the only thing left to write about. I'd say he had a good week.
No, I take your point that refusing to acknowledge the legitimacy of the president in the Trump world is a good week. And
he ducked a very tough question. Yes.
No, I mean, I agree. I definitely agree. I was wrong to say he had a bad week. In surely political terms, he had it because people like me are saying bad things about him, and that's how politics works.
New York Magazine wrote a piece saying, he's through. That was insane. Okay, he's not through.
Okay, just quickly.
He may still lose. I mean, he's a nice guy. He's much too nice to win a Senate race. Okay?
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's a great guy.
I think he is a nice guy. What
are the signs that he's a nice guy?
Well, look at his speech at the National Populist Conservatism Conference. His whole affect is I'm a genial father who just wants the best for my working class people. I've had interactions with him on.
So he conveyed that in a political speech, and so it must be true.
No, I've had interactions with him, and he seems like a very nice guy.
Well, I
had interactions with him around the Kavanaugh nomination.
Well, he knows you're the kind of guy who says that
at some point, if you
QAnon adjacency is okay.
At some point, if you convince everybody that you're a nice guy, maybe you sort of are a nice guy, even in objective terms, even if you're fundamentally evil in your own mind, right?
Well, I don't think he's convinced everybody. I think that didn't happen this week. So on to more lighthearted matters in somewhat the same vein. Your another guy you've supported for presidency, Tucker Carlson.
I reserve the right to come back to JD Vance since he's the story of the week, but go ahead.
Okay, but first, I'm curious. So this is Tucker. What is your position on Tucker? Is he still a viable presidential candidate?
Sure. He's gone off on a few tangents that seem a little out there to me. Because he has a talk show and he has to come up with something new every day. The fact that the NSA would leak on him is not one of those tangents. It seems like maybe that's plausible, but there have been some other ones that have been a little stranger. But, judging by modern standards, he's fine.
Okay, if I can get the volume to work. Yeah, okay, here we go. So here he's talking about teaching, I guess, critical race theory in the public schools, which I don't think happens much per se, and in any event, I don't think it's like a super looming threat. But anyway, here's his cure.
Overwhelming majority of Americans, and pollsters have found this pretty clearly, think this is insane. They think you should judge people by what they do, not on the basis of their skin color. They believe in Martin Luther King. So it is BS. In fact, it's more than that. It's civilization-ending poison. But it's everywhere. How widespread is it? Well, we can't really be sure until we finally get cameras in the classroom as we put them on the chests of police officers, until we finally get a civilian review board in every town in America to oversee the people teaching your children, forming their minds. And let's hope we get both of those very soon. But until we do, we can't know exactly how widespread this is. But there are indications. We know that these ideas, this poison, has made it all the way to expensive private schools in central Ohio.
So are you for cameras in every public school classroom?
I think it's probably unworkable, but so are all the other methods for rooting out CRT. I mean, the statutes sort of are speech infringing, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
Plus CRT is so deeply embedded in schools that even a statute isn't enough to root it out. If you have 100 teachers who believe in CRT and you say you shall not teach CRT, have you rooted it out? No, you still have 100 tenured faculty members who are teaching your children.
Well, wait.
It seems to me that the classroom thing is sort of a heavy-handed attempt to deal with that problem, and it's probably very unfair to the teachers and is doomed. But the only other alternative is to break up the public school system and have an entirely new system of choice where the parents that don't want their kids to learn CRT can go to schools that don't teach CRT. That's where all this is heading. Is this heading toward screw the public school system, let it collapse? And that's a bad thing.
Well, I mean, in terms of the public school system collapsing, I mean, it's hard enough to recruit good, even in the sense of competent teachers in many public school districts. If you say, and by the way, you'll be in a panopticon, there will be a camera on you, I mean, it's going to be completely hopeless. I mean, this is totally a recipe.
I think that's why it's doomed, but I don't think it's crazy to suggest it. I just think it's doomed.
No,
he's looking around for solutions.
No, but I don't just mean it's politically doomed. It would be ridiculously destructive. It's a stupid idea.
I mean, it's doomed because you can't subject teachers to that kind of 24/7 Orwellian snooping.
Okay. I have no idea what the evidence is that this is a huge problem in the average public school. I don't remember my daughters coming home. I mean, it's been a few years since they were.
That was a long time ago, Bob, in CRT terms.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. Well, I mean, what form does it assume in the public schools?
Keep in mind, the answer is I don't know, but nor have I read enough Christopher Rufo to completely grok it. I'm sure the right is exaggerating it, but it's also I'm sure there's also a chunk there that's very real, but I don't know to what extent it is. Keep in mind, I just watched the excellent Blogging Heads podcast between Glenn Loury and Charles Murray. Glenn says, look, if you don't believe in the Martin Luther King individual thing, it sort of is the end of our democracy. And Charles sort of agrees, because they agree if whites form an identity movement So they're judging on the color of their skin. That's it. That's game over. And it would be a horrible, destructive development.
Why would it surprise you?
It's not crazy to hold out the MLK individuality as Chucker did as being a key to democracy.
Why does it surprise you that Charles Murray agreed?
No, but it surprised me that Glenn said it.
Oh, I think you should pay more attention to Glenn. This has been his line for years.
I think Glenn agreed with Murray almost agreed with Murray when Murray said a white identity politics movement would be incredibly destructive, and the word Charles used is game over. But
by the way, that reminds me, if I can find what was on the screen while Tucker
more destructive than not saying that Biden is a legitimate president.
Well, while Tucker was on screen saying this thing, speaking of that, I don't know if you can see this, but there's on the screen next to him, there's this big donkey like the Democratic Party, and it says anti-white mania. That's the message from Fox is there's anti-white mania.
Well, there might be anti-white mania.
Party. Really? Who represents that in the Democratic Party?
You mean in the Democratic Party?
Yeah, they've got a big donkey, and it says anti-white mania.
I have to have more knowledge of the fringier progressive left, but so nobody in the Senate.
Before you get back to JD Vance, since you started off with my elderliness or something, who was this guy? I want to know who this guy is. I want you to dox him.
Who?
Whoever said that about me, the thing you started out with.
It's Michael Drew. I was reading from my Twitter feed. You read it too, I think.
And you think he's a Parrot Room patron?
Yes. He's a regular commenter. He's a prolific tweeter.
I was about to start talking.
Sometimes he's very helpful, and sometimes, like many prolific tweeters, he says whatever's on his mind, and what was on his mind at the moment was that we looked really old. We have
the power to suspend patrons, you know. I'm just saying.
So now you're turning into a totalitarian.
Just a shot across the bow.
I think we should have a camera in Michael Drew's living room 24 hours a day, just in case he feels like tweeting that we're old.
He took the words right out of my mouth.
Anyway.
So I was going to use him as a segue to talk about, I forget. Oh yeah, Alzheimer's. No, I want to talk about the new Alzheimer's drug.
There's a solution. There's no solution to Alzheimer's, but there is a solution to us looking old.
That beard you were wearing?
Play it at 1.5 speed.
Well, they can do that. They have the power to do that.
Then we sound fine.
They have the power to do that, right?
Then we sound fine. We sound normal at 1.5 speed.
Yeah, I know. I come away. It's bad for my self-esteem to listen to podcasts because I always crank them up to 1.5, and I'm thinking, God, these people are so much quicker than I am.
You sound great on 1.5 too. Glenn Loury sounds like the smartest man in the universe at 1.5.
You should hear Eric Weinstein. Speaking of which, okay, so I want to get back.
He speaks at 1.5
normally. I want to get back to the Alzheimer's drug.
Okay.
But before that, as long as we're talking about the Parrot Room and Eric Weinstein, I want to say that, as our patrons know, over the last couple of weeks in the Parrot Room, we've been discussing my grand unified hypothesis only at this point of the Weinstein brothers, Brett and Eric, that both are cranks. It's just a hypothesis. I haven't pronounced yet on whether I'm ready to take it to the level of theory. But one thing that happened is yesterday I taped a long conversation with a mathematician who has co-authored with a physicist, a PhD in physics, a critique of Eric Weinstein's his own grand unified theory, his theory of everything, his theory of physics that he really thinks can kind of literally save the world because he thinks that it will allow us to escape the solar system. If it's right, which he thinks it is. So that was a good conversation. We got into all kinds of stuff.
Well,
Go
ahead.
Well, I just want to say I have, on my podcast Tuesday night, the Wright Show, but I've uploaded it to the Parrot Room. So patrons get a sneak preview, and that would be at patreon.com/Parrot Room, Mickey.
I noticed that our commenters know a whole lot more about physics than we do, and their discussions of Weinstein, which I think talked about the guy you're interviewing, were a lot more sophisticated than ours, and they involved Eric thinking he understood gauge theory in a way that told other physicists he didn't understand gauge theory, and I went and looked up gauge theory, and I certainly don't understand gauge theory. It just reinforced my sense that physics is just way too literal. Almost, it's like when I found that the string theory actually did postulate that the universe was made of strings.
Right.
I just gave up.
Now, we should say gauge theory isn't the idea that the universe is made of gauges,
no.
but but it involves
gauges, which is bizarre.
This guy Tim Nguyen that I spoke to yesterday did his PhD dissertation in math it was very gauge theory relevant. It was specifically on a set of equations that are credited to Ed Witten of string theory fame and another guy. And one of Eric's claims is that he actually thought of the equations first. And Tim recounts how in his first encounter with Eric on a Discord server, he asked him some questions about these equations. And again, Tim did his PhD dissertation on these equations. And he says that convinced him that Eric didn't have the conversancy in these equations that you would expect from someone who actually thought them up. So anyway.
Wait, Eric claims to have thought of these equations before
Ed Witten and the other guy. They're called the something Witten equations, and they're of mathematical importance, even leaving aside any application to physics, I think. And Eric has said that if he hadn't been discouraged by his advisors from proceeding along these lines, then there's some revolution that would have happened at Harvard, where he was a PhD student, rather than at Princeton, where Ed Witten was.
Well, that's a very different claim.
Yeah, it's not strictly speaking connected to his grand unified theory, but it's what got Tim interested. I mean, Tim was a fan of Eric's, actually. He liked the podcast, and he started asking him about this, and that raised questions. And look, I'm not fit to judge this stuff, but it's an interesting conversation.
Maybe if he hadn't been discouraged by his advisor, he would understand it better.
Maybe.
The claim is not, I had the equations on my notepad and they wouldn't let me publish. It's that if I hadn't been discouraged, I would have eventually discovered the equations. That's a much softer claim.
Well, you're going on what I said, or you've heard what he says?
I'm totally going on what you said.
Oh, well, I may have been understating it. I mean, Tim knows exactly what he said. And, no, he has suggested that they shouldn't have the name they have. They shouldn't have Witten's name on them. He's gone that far. He calls them the so-called so-and-so equation. Anyway, I digress. It's on Patreon, and it'll be out in 3 days.
Yeah. Let the record show that I too had Alzheimer's drug written on my notepad, but I only have one point to make about it. So you may have a more interesting point.
Well, I just mainly listened to this New York Times podcast and then did a little reading, but it seems to me possibly outrageous that the FDA, or is it the FDA would have approved it, right? Yeah. That they approved it. I mean,
well, they pulled that back now.
Well, no, they restricted the number of people they're approving it. Now they're saying it's only early stage, Alzheimer's patients who should get it, but that's 1.5 million people. And the New York Times coverage suggests that will be a signal to Medicare that they should reimburse people. Now we're talking about a drug that costs $56,000 a year, 1.5 million people. That's like total payment of 80 billion. If Medicare pays for a significant chunk of that, given what we know about the drug's actual efficacy and risk, it sounds crazy. Sounds crazy.
Right, but my point is, this is the easy case because the drug doesn't work very well. The hard case will be if the drug actually worked, would we fork over the 80 billion? And the answer, I think, is yes.
But it looks like we're going to fork it over now. That's what I'm saying. And it doesn't work.
Now it's a much iffier case, and maybe we shouldn't. But the point is that there's a big, seemingly insoluble problem coming down the road.
Well, yeah, it's here.
I'm trying to hew to the Kinsley guideline, which is if the president gets it, everybody should get it. And would the president get an Alzheimer's drug? A test case that may come up sooner than you think before the rest of the population. And the answer is no. And if it costs $80 billion, it costs $80 billion. We'd rather spend the money on video games? No.
Well, this is your line on all this stuff, and it's not mine. This Correct. Is where you want to restrict the development of new drugs in order to make them more affordable. Well, I wouldn't restrict the development, but if you per se, but that might be that would be a byproduct of pouring less in the way of tax dollars into drugs of marginal value.
Yeah, like I say, you would restrict the development of new drugs.
No, not explicitly.
As a byproduct. Fine, as a byproduct.
Okay, but let me tell you, here's the date on this. Here's the date on this drug, okay? So Biogen set up 2 studies, okay? 8 months into the study, Biogen looked at the data and pulled the plug. They said there's no signs that this drug does any good. Biogen made that call.
Right.
Then they looked at, they poured over the data and they said, well, in one study, the patients that took the highest dose showed marginal improvement. Not in the other study. In one study, and the nature of the improvement, there's a point scale for evaluating people, like on memory tasks or whatever, that goes from 0 to 18. Okay. Right. And one study found that people at the highest dose improved their scores by less than 1 point on 1 of 18. Okay. A fraction of a point. No significant improvement in the other study. And the drug has side effects. 40% of the people, and I think this is all recipients, not just the high dosage, 40% had either brain swelling or bleeding in the brain of at least some magnitude, not necessarily, fatal or dangerous, but 40% is a pretty big number. And now they're saying, the standard dose is going to be this high dose. Okay. I assume, because that's the only thing that has a prayer of working.
So why did the Biden FDA go for this? Since presumably the Biden FDA is very concerned with being able to finance entitlements.
I assume that there's a powerful lobby. I mean, at first I was thinking, could it be that there's a few billionaire donors who have early stage Alzheimer, but the Times emphasized just the senior citizens lobby. But honestly, if I had early stage, well, it's easy for me to say now, but I mean, there's very little chance it'll do you any good. Quite a bit of chance it'll either make your brain swell or bleed.
Well, that makes sense. The demand for it is so intense, and in a sort of political holding action, they may feel they have to throw him a bone and keep him busy with this relatively useless drug until an actual useful drug is developed.
Yeah, but why?
Most scientists in the area think that they're going to succeed versus Alzheimer's, right?
Well, they think, but one thing I wonder, and I just haven't looked into it, there may be the answer, is, they always talk about this certain kind of protein that builds up in Alzheimer's patients as if that were the cause or a cause of the problem. Maybe they know it is, but this is a drug that apparently did succeed in breaking down that protein, but to some considerable extent, but does little, if any, good. So
I got the impression from the coverage that they basically conceded that the protein was the problem, was the cause, and not just an effect of some other process.
Then maybe this drug is.
That's a good point you make about that. If it reduced the protein and people stayed senile, then maybe it's not the protein.
Well, I know very little about this, but it's alarming to me. I mean, as a taxpayer, and I would think you could get some other taxpayers upset about this. I mean, this is non-trivial money, and if you're going to continue to make Medicare available to all, you're going to have to draw some lines. And this is an easy one to draw. Seems like. You're against line drawing in this case. I know.
No. I think you could decide that this was the positive effects, the net positive effects weren't worth it. I don't think that's crazy, but I just like to hear the other side. But anyway, you can't blame it on Trump. That's all I care about. Or JD Vance.
No, you don't blame it on Trump. There was something else. Want something to blame on Trump?
Sure.
This is pretty oblique. It's just that I heard, Haiti is a mess. The president who was assassinated had a dubious claim to legitimacy on a number of grounds. He seems to have, arguably had overstayed his limitation in office. He'd been ruling more or less by decree. There were doubts about the election that initially got him into office. And I heard today, I read somewhere that the reason that Trump, one thing that had kept him in office was the Americans supporting him. And the reason the Trump administration supported him is because he was on our side against Venezuela. And I just want to say, this is the price you pay when you, for reasons that make no sense at all, decide you're going to, you're going to impose these draconian sanctions on the Venezuelans in hopes of making some kind of magical regime change happen. And then you start, and if people ask, well, why are you doing that? You say, well, it's in the long-term interest of the Venezuelan people. Meanwhile, you're organizing other parts of your foreign policy around this goal, which makes no sense in its own right, and disregarding the welfare of people elsewhere. So it's like, screw the Haitians and whether or not this guy deserves to be president. He is on our side against Venezuela. It's like, why should that matter? It's just like a domino effect of stupidity.
That assumes that that's the real reason.
I read it in the papers.
Well, there you go. But the fact that now that he's dead, the entire country is falling apart in a civil war suggests that maybe he was holding the country together in a way that others would not hold the country together. Maybe I'm not an expert in Haiti, and I defer to Amy Wilentz on all matters Haitian. Maybe the only reasons the demonstrations against him hadn't succeeded in ousting him is that the Americans were on his side. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, did Trump had all the old Bushy anti-Chavez people back in the State Department? I don't think so. Well, for a time, Bolton was there, and that during when there was that kind of ridiculous coup that failed, and that we seem to have kind of, I don't know if we okayed it in advance or whatever, but that was on Bolton's watch, I think. Yeah. But my line is it's turning out that McMaster may be. I think I saw some reference to him now being at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which would be a pretty clear signal that he was more trouble than some of us appreciated at first. I don't know. My line is that Venezuela is a lost cause because the left has all the guns and the military advantage, and even if you took over the government, the left would still have all the guns and the militias out in the countryside. So give it up. You're not going to win. It's like Korea. Korea, we recognize that the North has a military advantage with all these artillery devices outside of Seoul. So we have to build our policy around that. Right. Build the policy around the fact that we're not going to overthrow the government of Venezuela. But that doesn't mean in other cases, maybe it would be worth overthrowing a government. Probably not the government of Venezuela. Did you read Josh Rogan's piece, as long as we're on foreign policy, about how China, by coming, this company Didi, which is a ride-sharing app, right, was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and American investors poured billions of dollars into it. And right after that happened, China cracked down on it, and in a way that implied that, they were never going to maximize their money, and their stock fell 30%. And that Rogan claims that this has opened Wall Street's eyes about the perils of investing in China over the long run with untold consequences, which he doesn't go into. But seem to make sense to me. I don't understand why the political risk of investing in China seems so great now. I don't understand why you would do that.
Yeah. I mean, China's like, made app stores remove all the apps for this ride-hailing company, and a ride-hailing company without apps is kind of in trouble. I'm not totally clear on whether, as some people are reporting, it's to punish them for going public on the New York exchange, or, there's another thing that's been going on for some time with the Chinese government and tech companies, which is that the government is jealous of the personal data they're gathering. And I think wants easier access to it, or doesn't want them to monopolize it, or maybe doesn't want them to have it in the first place. It could be either of those things or both. I mean, a thought I had, I think you're right. Yeah, it makes Chinese companies less attractive to invest in. And a thought I had, by way of maybe partly salvaging an earlier, idea I championed, 20 years ago, I was saying that I thought, it was going to be hard for China to have it both ways, to, use digital technology to achieve prosperity without, giving the use of the digital technologies enough free rein to, to preserve at least some political liberty, some political pluralism. I think there is a little more political pluralism than people, recognize in China. At the same time, clearly the government's done a better job than I thought they would, for the time being, fostering prosperity and yet cracking down on free expression and on the digital technologies. But I wondered if this is not the form I imagined the tension, taking, the tension between, pursuing prosperity and clamping down. But, it may be that it is a form of it. It is a manifestation of that tension.
Could it also be, as on the grounds that everything is simpler and cruder than you think? Could it also be that just Xi is jealous of guys like Jack Ma having so much power and wealth and independence, and and they're a threat, so he's cracked down on Jack Ma, and I think Ma was an investor in this company.
It's possible. She seems like a pretty clever operator. I doubt he succumbs to just kind of base rank jealousy if it's not in his interest or the interests he identifies with. There could be a like, we don't want, any corporate titans getting too big for their britches. We're the government here. And that could also, all of these things could, make it harder for China to have it both ways, to preserve prosperity. If their corporations are less attractive investment vehicles for investors around the world, that's going to reduce the capital available to them, I would think. And that's an example of prosperity being at least a little harder to maintain, you'd think.
He's obviously willing in his sophistication to pay that price. So.
In this case, yeah. Yeah.
I had a point on infrastructure. I'm sure you're.
I was afraid we'd go a day without infrastructure is like a day without sunshine, Mickey.
But I can't find my point, so
I am sorry to hear that. Now let's see. Afghanistan. Biden defended his Afghanistan withdrawal in the face of.
I get it. I remember my infrastructure point.
Just in time.
Sorry. Right now the way the debate is, there's this bipartisan. There are these two parts. There's the hard infrastructure part and the soft infrastructure part, which contains all the goodies that the Dems really care about, like this child tax credit money, and also like some people say amnesty. Okay, so the left wants to stick a big amnesty in the reconciliation bill, which would vindicate my fears, which is why I voted for Trump, that Biden would produce a huge amnesty. He hasn't yet. People say it's a long shot, but I don't quite understand why it's a long shot. Anyway, the left correctly recognizes that if they pass the bipartisan bill in the Senate, that it reduces the chances of them getting this big bill through a Democrats only vote that would include all the amnesty and all the other big things they want. So they're going to vote down the bipartisan bill. It will initially fail in the Senate because enough Democrats will abandon it that it won't get 60 votes. So the Democrats will then try to do their big bill, and maybe they come back to the bipartisan bill later if they have to. But this idea that on July 19th, the Senate is going to start voting on the bipartisan bill, and damn it, they're going to pass it, seems crazier and crazier to me. Because
can you remind us?
The Dems have woken up to realize that it's the enemy of their grand ambitions.
But why exactly is it that passing the bipartisan bill makes it less likely to get the?
Because if you're a moderate Dem, if you're a moderate Dem in the House and you don't want to vote for Pelosi's grand bill with all the goodies, you can vote no and still have achieved something if you've achieved the bipartisan bill. So you can go to your constituents and say, hey, we built $50 billion of bridges. Okay, we didn't do the big package, but it was a start. We got something done. Congress can work again. If that alternative is unavailable, it's either vote for Pelosi or face the abyss of having done nothing. And no, they don't want to face the abyss. So it marginally increases the power of moderate Democrats who at least they'll have something.
So this is why Biden felt there had to be this threat that it's either both or nothing. His mistake was to say that publicly, apparently, but it might not have been a viable strategy. Anyway, did I ask you last week, why didn't he just let Pelosi take the hit for that? Word could get out.
I don't understand that. I think that's a good question because somebody got to him who was foolish.
I don't think.
He's foolish again.
I worry that that's not what happened. That Biden isn't, as in charge of his mouth as he used to be even in the old days. It wasn't in a prepared speech that he said it, right?
It wasn't part of his prepared remarks, but he clearly intended it. It wasn't just a off the cuff misspeaking. Yeah. He was delivering the soundbite for that press conference. It seemed
prepared. But
the two theories are not completely inconsistent. The more senile he gets, the more likely he is to fall for bullshit. And we still haven't found out who in the White House told him to do that, or did Pelosi tell him that? That's clearly a key thing the press should find out, and they haven't found out. But I'm not. If I were a Democrat, I would not be pessimistic that you might get the whole ball of wax. I'm increasingly pessimistic from my point of view. I don't want them to get the whole ball of wax, but who the hell knows? It doesn't seem crazy to me now that they would somehow manage to hold all their troops in line. But they have to vote down the bipartisan bill first if they want to do that. I think that's my infrastructure point.
Okay,
pretty exciting,
and that is, of course, you tend to anticipate things that terrify you. And this would terrify you because it would mean child tax credit, right?
And amnesty. It would be a massive nation-changing amnesty. It would be basically not game over, but it would be a game-changing event.
But we should discount your prediction by virtue of your tendency to anticipate things that you fear.
My allies in the immigration fight tend not to be as alarmed as I am. I don't know why.
Maybe they don't have the same tendency you have to anticipate things.
The standard argument is that the chaos at the border has so harmed the Democrats that they don't want to double down on it by now passing an amnesty. So that Biden made a strategic mistake. He let the progressives, run the border, but that means the progressives aren't going to get their big amnesty because the way they run the border has so alienated the voters. They may just, it may be like the House impeachment of Clinton. They may just do it because they can get away with it. And so what if they lose the Congress? They're going to lose the Congress anyway.
Okay. Now, can I quickly say something about the pandemic?
Yes.
we are now starting to see, finally, the last few days, you've seen an uptick in cases in the U.S. that seems significant and is presumably a result of the Delta variant. In Britain, this started happening like 6 weeks ago, and the death rate has only started rising there in the last few days, I think, and it's still lower per capita than ours, and so it's not clear that this spells doom, but it does look like the case numbers are finally actually growing.
But if this variant weren't as deadly, or if it were like very undeadly, it wouldn't be so terrible that it's sweeping through the population, because it's basically providing immunity without killing people. Now, I think the virus does all sorts of other things to fuck you up, so it's probably a bad idea.
Yeah, it can.
But I think you focused on the key issue, which is, will the death rate go up as these variants? Because it's not uncommon, correct me if I'm wrong, for a less lethal variant to supersede, but more infectious variant to supersede a more lethal variant.
That can happen in a case where lethality per se isn't good for the virus. There are viruses that spread themselves through the death and decomposition of the organism, but this isn't one of those. But I heard somewhere that now in the U.S., more than 99%. This was some credible source like NPR or something. More than 99% of the people who die of COVID in the U.S. are unvaccinated. I mean, given the fact that that's no more than half the population, that's pretty striking. And I would think an argument for getting vaccinated, notwithstanding Bret Weinstein's arguments that vaccination is dangerous.
Well, I think we discussed this last week. I think you're right, but I do think that, I have this, I think there are a whole lot more people who have minor complications from the vaccine, and there's tremendous omerta to not spread this news.
I think that's, I think the second thing is true. There's definitely, kind of peer pressure not to say anti-vax sounding things. But having heard Brett's arguments, I mean, they're pretty conjectural, his based on anecdotal evidence and then some kind of, conjecture about what happens when a bunch of spike proteins go to various parts of your body. Yeah. We don't know, but I haven't seen, I don't know.
One of our readers, or somewhere I read that there's some study that comes down on ivermectin like a ton of bricks.
Well, there have been, I don't know, a ton of bricks. I have seen meta-analyses that did not find a significant positive effect from ivermectin. I've seen a meta-analysis that did find.
There's no way that it's going to be as beneficial as the vaccine. So why are we having this argument? I mean.
Well, Brett's claim is that there's good reason to think it's a very powerful prophylactic if you take it once a week. Again.
Okay. So it would be as good as a vaccine. Okay.
And the thing about it is known to be pretty safe because it's been used for other reasons. But,
right.
I haven't seen,
right.
I haven't seen compelling yet. Oh, that reminds me of something I got to correct from last week that I seem to have gotten wrong. I said that YouTube had demonetized him, but hadn't taken these offending videos down. And that's because when I listened to the podcast, the offending podcast, I went to YouTube and there the videos were. But some commenters said I was wrong. They had taken them down. And assuming they're right, apparently what's happening is that there's a cat and mouse game where YouTube takes them down and somebody other than Brett puts them up or puts a shortened version of them up or something. And in fact, last time I checked, the one with Pierre Corey or whatever his name is was still up. But apparently that's not the original version and YouTube did take them down. I gather these are two separate operations. I mean, demonetizing, I assume, means he can't advertise on any of his videos now on his channel. And then I assume they have selectively taken down videos they find offending. Anyway, it sounds like I got that wrong.
Thank you. There are a couple of little things. One is I made a big deal about how Michael Wolff's account of the January 6th riot did not sort of exculpated Trump of the worst charges, which is that he conspired with the rioters to block the vote. Okay. But there are all sorts of other books in the pipeline, not just the one I mentioned. There's a Maggie Haberman book. There's a Woodward book. But one of the first to come out of the box is the Michael Bender book, which is coming out early next week. And the big leak from that was that Trump once said Hitler did some good things. So if that's the big news from the Michael Bender book, I think you can cross the Michael Bender book off as the book that's going to provide the details of Trump's involvement in the January 6th riot.
Wait, why? That's
just not so big. If that's your big, your big scoop in your book doesn't have many big scoops. Maybe a great book doesn't have many big scoops.
Does he say what the good things were?
What do you mean the good things?
That Trump thought Hitler did?
No, that's a good point. It
matters. It matters.
It matters a lot which ones you choose. I choose the Autobahn.
It's like, who was it? Marge Schott, who was owner of the Cincinnati Reds, I think, said about Hitler, he just went too far. Yeah, I would say he went too far.
First we kill half the Jews, and the Jews are happy, and Hitler is happy. It's the Roger Fisher solution.
Second half, too far. Now speaking of the Michael Wolff book, now last week you gave us his account of January 6th, according to which Trump is so clueless that he couldn't have. It's hard to believe he would have known that people were inside the Capitol when he tweeted, "Mike Pence has betrayed us." What I learned, and I think from you probably since we taped, is that the whole thesis of Michael Wolff's book is that Trump was this clueless guy. He didn't have a plan. He was just Mr. Magoo being led around. And fine, maybe that's right. But my point is that suggests to me that it could well be that the Jan 6 part of the book is colored to fit the overall thesis of the book. I don't think I'd put that past Michael Wolff from what I know of him. I wouldn't put it past most of us. It's hard not to do that. But
in my newsletter post on this issue, I made that point.
Having heard it from me, and is that true?
Yeah.
But did you credit me?
No, I didn't credit. You'll go throughout your life saying, I made that point first, and Mickey did not credit me. You'll be like Eric Weinstein. I could have gotten credit for that point. It would have been a Bob Wright point.
I have bigger grievances of that very kind than this one. And that's one of the things I got to say.
I made that point in my newsletter.
One of the things during this conversation I had with this guy yesterday, I played devil's advocate throughout, partly because Eric wasn't there to defend himself, but also because I really identify with certain parts of his, as I approach my verdict on the question of whether one or both brothers are cranks, I'm not going to do it without a certain amount of sympathy for various parts of Eric's psychology.
Is there going to be a big verdict ceremony where you deliver your verdict clad in a black robe?
I'm hoping he will show up. I'm hoping Eric will show up. You should
certainly try to get him on your podcast before you render the verdict, right?
I mean, he's refusing to engage these guys who did a serious critique of his theory. He's instead, vilifying them.
Well, but maybe he figures he can take you. You're not a physicist, He can bowl you over.
Yeah, well, I'm not up to arguing with him about his theory. That's for sure. He does know a lot about physics.
I'll tell him what the hot button things you should say to win you over are.
You should tell me those too, but possibly not in public.
Okay. So there's a Hunter Biden development, but that could be in the Parrot Room.
Okay, I'm writing these things down.
There is this controversy over whether big tech is conspiring against JD Vance, because if you try to look up JD Vance campaign website, Google will try to give you like 20 other sites before it gives you the JD Vance campaign website, and DuckDuckGo will immediately give you the JD Vance campaign website. And does that mean that Google is biased against JD Vance, or does it just mean that they're so sophisticated that they produce this garbage.
Microsoft's Bing, by the way, does give you his website.
Right.
So it's not an across-the-board tech conspiracy. Maybe it's Silicon Valley, but not Seattle.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it could be Google, just a Google thing. But so
okay, we will discuss that.
I'm
not convinced it's Google, but we'll discuss that.
There's, I don't know. I was very impressed with the Loury Murray dialogue, and I don't have a whole lot to say about it, but
you want to say more? Should I write it down?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a little thing about the this alleged, the Republicans making a big deal of the pay for in the unmentionable bill, but the I word bill, which is we beef up the IRS to a tune of $40 billion, and then they can go get the taxes that the rich corporations and individuals don't pay. And the Republicans are mounting a campaign against it, that this is sort of going to bring back the jackboot IRS. And I have something to say about that.
And not incidentally lead to rich people paying more taxes, another problem they have with it.
Yeah, but also not incidentally lead to rich people spending a lot of money on legal tax evasion and avoidance solutions that do nothing to add to the productivity of society. So there is a downside to jackbooting the IRS.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that rich people get away with murder; it's that they go to elaborate lengths and employ very smart people wastefully to let them get away with murder through.
Yeah, no, I'd rather reduce the loopholes they can exploit in the first place, in which case the whole thing is more clear cut, and raise the rates while we're at it. Is there anything else you have for the Parrot Room?
Not that I can think of now. There's what happens in immigration when Biden lifts these health restrictions that are allowing him to keep out the majority of single men who are trying to get into the country. But I think we talked about that before. The question is, will he pay a huge political price?
Okay.
There's Epstein. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a little Epstein. Is there a lot? Is there more than the fact that Marty Peretz's name was found in his Rolodex?
But that's more meaningful than you think it is, Bob.
Oh.
Not because Marty's implicated, but because Marty explained how he met Epstein.
Oh, Marty has already explained that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, for my part, I do want to talk a little more about the Weinsteins. I listened to Brett Weinstein's Richard Dawkins dialogue, so I want to continue to weigh the evidence in the that will ultimately determine whether I have a grand unified theory of the Weinstein brothers, and talk a little about the Eric thing too. I mean, it was a really interesting interview, which again is in the Parrot Room even as we speak. I watched a couple of foreign movies. Maybe I could say something about one or the other. Weird Russian movie called Stalker. Not in the sense you would think of Stalker, but classic by Andrei Tarkovsky, great Soviet era director, and presumably maybe later too. But this is 1979. I watched Fellini's La Strada. That's the kind of thing you would have watched, right?
I don't think so.
Oh. You disappoint me.
Too much symbolism, too little plot.
Actually, I would say that's closer to being something you could say about Stalker than La Strada. But how do you know it's true of La Strada if you haven't seen it? Well, we'll discover that in the Parrot Room. And then, you said we will discuss JD Vance, at which time I'll have an opportunity to discuss him in more moderate tones. I was a little too. What's the word for what I was? There's a word. The way in which I was judgmental of him was, moralistic. There's another word. Anyway, I mean, I recognize politicians. There's a certain kinds of thing.
Over-caffeinated.
I think I did overcompensate for not getting much sleep last night on the caffeine front, but don't worry. It'll have worn off by the Parrot Room.
There's the possibility that Trump will meet his Waterloo in an Ohio congressional election where he has endorsed the opponent of a popular incumbent.
Glad to hear that. Trump, Waterloo.
But now I've said it, it's not clear that I have anything to add to that.
Well, I will add nuance to my verdict on JD Vance then in the Parrot Room. I
look forward to that.
Nuance.
It's not clear that I have anything much more to say about JD Vance, but I'm ready for nuance.
Okay. And so that's it. That is at patreon.com/Parrot Room, where we will be.
Have we been talking for over an hour?
Yes, well over. It sneaks up on you, but like well over.
And we have not fallen asleep. Sorry, Mr. Drew.
I don't know. I think he could point to my performance as vindication of a kind.
And why? Because you were better.
No, because the only way I could not fulfill his view, not comply with his view of me, was to be like an asshole. He wants something in between senile and energized asshole.
How do you know he wants an asshole? That's weird.
No, he doesn't want an asshole. Nobody wants an asshole.
Okay. He wants energy, I mean. Yeah.
He wants energy without asshole.
You had that.
Yeah, but I was an asshole. I feel very bad.
God, you're usually a much bigger asshole. Okay.
Okay, I feel better now. Thanks for that.
Plus, I deal with bigger assholes than you all the time. So.
Yeah, well, you live in Beverly Hills.
No, the people in Beverly Hills aren't. Beverly Hills is Trump Company, baby.
Can I plug one other thing? No, I've already done a pretty heavy promotion job today, right? Should I just not promote anything? Should I say nothing else promotional?
They've tuned out already. You can promote.
Okay. Smash the like button. Rate and review the Wright show. And really, I want to make an earnest plea about that. You want to hear it?
Sure.
Podcasts are in the phase that blogs were in. Remember the golden days of blogging before slowly big media kind of in effect crushed the blogs? I mean, they bought up some of the high traffic blogs. Slowly, one way or another, the energy got drained from blogs. Podcasts, it's more and more bigfooting, they're bigfooting the little guys like us. And you can fight this. You can preserve truly independent blogging. What?
Do you think that's happening with Substack too? We're all getting crushed by Matt Iglesias and Glenn Greenwald?
No, what I'm talking about is podcasts that are on a platform that ultimately they will find constraining, that ultimately is constraining. I mean, there's a lot of things you can't say if you're a podcast on a New York Times platform, different kinds of things on slates.
Your podcast will thrive because you can say those things.
Well, that would be a wonderful world to live in where good prevails, but that's not the way it tends to work. Actually, I mean, things get consolidated and concentrated and little guys get squashed. So
a lot of those little guys will be people who want to say that the election was illegitimate.
Those are not my people. They should find another little guy podcast.
Okay, but the point is that you'll be in favor of squashing some of these little guys. Maybe.
I don't want to squash them.
Okay.
I just don't want to vote for somebody who caters to them. But I will nuance my view of JD Vance in the Parrot Room. Another way to support us is to go there. But also, your Chaos Files newsletter.
Yeah.
I'm Non-Zero newsletter.
Yeah. I just came out with a newsletter.
Oh, yeah, it was a good one.
One of the reasons I'm lethargic.
Well, let's discuss that in the Parrot Room, because you put a finer point on something you had said that I thought was persuasive. Okay. Is this the one where you talk about Gore's version of...
Correct.
Yeah. That was good. It was good.
Anyway, the most important thing, Bob?
Yeah?
Play it at 1.5.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I will see you in the Parrot Room.